Greetings, Peter Saturday back again from Universal Dork, here today to talk about another really rad movie from the 1980s. Of course, one that does not get enough attention. In fact, I rarely hear anyone talk about this thing. But this film has been on my radar and one of my favorites for quite a long time. It's a film from 1988 called The Kiss. Yes, this one is a pretty cool, underseen little gem that's basically, for the most part, I consider trapped on VHS. Now, it did receive, I believe, a 2004 release on DVD, but that version of the film is extremely hard to find, and the prices that I've seen it going for are anywhere from like $60 to like $225 for a DVD. Now, this one is most definitely ripe for the picking for a brand new Blu-ray. I don't know why this thing has not gotten more attention, and someone hasn't stepped to the plate to do that, because The Kiss is actually a pretty goddamn solid little 1980s teen family drama thriller horror film that actually goes the distance, especially in its finale. This one is a ton of fun. So as you can see, The Kiss right here, I would say that this thing really doesn't have a cover that really sells the film. I've always thought that this cover was, I don't know, pretty lame actually. It is a pretty solid 1980s horror film with some cool like gore and some pretty good practical effects, as well as some cool like monster effects in it. When I say cool, I mean really fucking cheesy effects, which I'm a huge fan of. But honestly, one of the best things about The Kiss is not necessarily the horror or anything about that. I mean, it is pretty solid, but for me, being an 80s kid, the biggest draw to The Kiss back in the day was the fact that its lead is Meredith Salenger, who, I don't know if you recognize her from Dream a Little Dream or remember her from that film, but wow, back in the day, my friends and I, we were all extremely crushed out on her. Meredith Salenger, who is the wife of Patton Oswalt. Pretty interesting. Lucky guy. I'm sure he probably never thought that he would end up with her. Kind of the icing on the cake for The Kiss, having her as kind of the lead teenager in this film. And I'm like a huge fan of like the teen comedies and the sex comedies of the 1980s and the teen romances and the teen dramas and stuff. I love all that stuff. So having her in a bona fide horror film kind of legitimizes this thing a little bit more for myself. Now, there's another film that she starred in, actually from 1991, that I just discovered probably within the last 2 years. I have no idea how this thing evaded me for so long, but I was out thrifting one day and I discovered this particular film, Edge of Honor. Now, okay, obviously awesome that Meredith is in this film as one of the main stars of it. A great action survival thriller film in the wilderness, which I'm a complete sucker for. Add even more fuel to the fire for Edge of Honor here. We've also got Corey Feldman. Yeah, he's one of the stars of this film as well. This is a great movie. I know Corey Feldman is kind of a douchebag nowadays, but I love him for his old appearances in some of these movies. And, you know, I even like to kind of follow Corey a little bit and all of the weird, bizarre shit that he does and some of his terrible performances and his, you know, incredibly unpredictable, ridiculous musical career as well. This is kind of interesting. He's in this film starring as like a Boy Scout. And I don't know, it's really weird. For a long time, Corey Feldman just sort of never aged. Like, he looks like, in Edge of Honor, he looks like he's like fucking 14 years old still, which is pretty crazy. 1991. I would say that The Kiss, if you wanted to do a really great, like, Meredith Salenger double feature, this would be perfect. The Kiss and Edge of Honor. But enough about that. So this is a neat little Canadian production here. It also features Joanna Pacula. Now, Joanna Pacula was a Polish actress and model, and I guess she was kind of known most for her appearance in the film Gorky Park. I think she won like a Golden Globe Award for that. She also appears in some other really cool films, in my opinion, like Marked for Death with Steven Seagal, Body Puzzle, Lamberto Bava, kind of one of his 1990s films. I think that one's from 1992. That one's pretty fun as well. She also made an appearance in a film that I watched recently, again, which remains to be one of my favorites of the 90s, which is Warlock 2 Armageddon with Julian Sands. Rest in peace. That guy is just so amazing in that role. Warlock 2 is just fucking brilliant horror movie. That one deserves way more praise. It is just jam-packed with awesome effects and just a really super fun storyline. So if you've never seen the first two Warlock films, highly recommend checking that out. But she appears in that movie, and then probably her most famous, most beloved role in a movie called Silence of the Hams. So yeah, the kiss is pretty jam-packed with 80s babes here. You've got Meredith on one end being kind of like the hero of the film, this teen hero, and then on the other end, you've got Joanna Pacula, a demonic succubus that creeps into the neighborhood and wreaks all sorts of havoc all over the place, at the mall, in the backyard, at pool parties, at barbecues, you name it. So this one's got a pretty simple plot. Suburban horror at its best. Let me actually read this to you off of the back of this.
Black magic, possession, and bizarre deaths turn a normal family's life into a non-stop nightmare. In the occult thriller, The Kiss, the terror begins in the Belgian Congo. An unsuspecting young girl boards a train for what will become a strange supernatural voyage. 25 years later, the girl, Felice, now a sensuous fashion model, suddenly appears in New York to visit her teenage niece, Amy. Although Amy is excited to meet her Aunt Felice, the arrival of this mysterious relative strangely coincides with a gruesome series of violent deaths. Amy soon realizes that, like Felice, she is about to become heir to a horrifying family legacy, and only her will to survive can keep her safe from the kiss.
So yeah, this film opens up in like the 1960s in Africa, where we see this kind of family carrying around this weird-looking sort of talisman that looks almost kind of like a demonic dildo. Now this weird-looking kind of demented dildo is passed on to kind of a young preteen girl by someone who I would assume is either her mother or her aunt or someone like that, passes this thing on to her while they're riding on a train in Africa, and then also gives this girl a kiss on the mouth, transferring this sort of demonic entity into her body. And then we see her step off of the train, and she looks probably about 5 years older, looks like she went through puberty, and looks like she's kind of ready for action. This talisman kind of changes your personality and gives you some sort of strange, strong urge for sensual, erotic behavior. Then we kind of flash forward into the 1980s, where we see Meredith in the church, going to confirmation, and at one point the priest is declaring her that she is now a soldier of Christ.
Do you renounce Satan?
I do renounce him. She's lovely.
I confirm you, Amy Bridget Halloran, as a soldier of Christ.
After her confirmation, we go to their backyard pool party where there's all these people hanging out. There's like priests kind of partying down. Jesus freaks, they love to party down too. They like to get hammered, get fucked up, just like the rest of us. The mom actually has to step out for a little while, step out of the party and go grab some supplies that she needs to bring back for everyone to keep the party going, bring back more Jesus juice for everybody. And on her way out, she ends up getting into a horrible accident. She gets hit by a car, smashed right through the window of a store. Pretty intense sequence, actually, and very gory. Catches you quite off guard, because the effects in this film actually are done by this guy named Chris Wallace, who worked on one of the best monster movie creature features of all time, The Fly. But that really doesn't mean that the special effects in this film are anywhere on par with The Fly. There are some pretty good ones on display here, but this thing escalates at several moments in the film that go well into the R-rated category and get pretty gory and gooey. And the mother's death in this film is admittedly pretty shocking. And that's one of my favorite things about 1980s films, is this style of cheesy practical effects. And this one's got a lot of them. So from that point on, the family is pretty much wrecked. And it's very clear that the father is a very lonely guy at this point. Joanna Pacula appears in the cemetery one day when they're going to kind of pay respects to their mom, I think like 5 or 6 months later. And she's standing by the grave there. And of course, she's looking very sexy, especially sexy to the dad when he sees her. He needs to get laid probably very soon. Joanna Pacula's character kind of immediately kind of forces her way into the life of Meredith and her father. And Meredith is really not having it. She's, first of all, kind of not feeling like she needs this woman to come in and sort of try to replace her mother. But then also she's noticing this sort of strange, bizarre sexual chemistry going on with her father and her aunt.
Good morning.
Coming into her life, kind of feeling like she owns the place.
Aren't you going to give your aunt a kiss?
She, at certain points, kind of catches wind of the way that Meredith Salenger is not into her hanging around the house, kind of hears her saying that she wishes that she would just disappear to some of her like teenage friends. The aunt kind of makes sure that people who have talked shit about her kind of end up paying the price, because there are some pretty insane events that happen to Meredith's friends, particularly her best friend, who has a pretty unfortunate accident on the escalator, and also this guy Terry that she's seeing that she's totally crushed out on. This guy kind of takes it upon himself to go see what's up with this lady, because he's also starting to catch wind that this lady has got some sort of evil, supernatural, sinister energy within her, and that she's also maybe practicing some sort of like black magic behind the scenes that's sort of corrupting the mind of her father. So anyway, all of these bad things begin to happen in this neighborhood all around the suburb. And I love that. Suburban horror in the 1980s is awesome. And again, we get to see some pretty gnarly special effects creep in certain scenes as Meredith kind of tries to fend off this evil aunt of hers. But even worse is that this Aunt Felice has this sort of like evil minion monster that she kind of commands around the neighborhood that's sneaking all around in bushes and stuff. And it appears as like this fucking like demented, sort of demonic, rabid cat in heat. This thing is brought to life with some really cool puppetry. And when I mean really cool, I mean really fucking cheesy and amazing, just the way I love it. So this little thing appearing around and attacking people. At one point, it jumps out of like the cabinet, where all of the cereal and stuff is, kind of leaps out of the cabinet and attacks the father, runs around and attacks the neighbor. There's kind of a neighbor woman in this. She's sort of like a soccer mom. She's one of the best characters in the movie, actually, and it's kind of being hinted that perhaps there's something maybe between her and Meredith's father as well. That's who you're kind of rooting for. You're thinking that would be who I would want my dad to hook up with. If he was going to hook up with anyone, it would be the cool soccer mom next door. This was back in the day when people were sort of like friends with their neighbors. I feel like nowadays, like no one wants to be friends with each other. This was back in the day when people really enjoyed knowing their neighbors and knowing that they had someone next door that they could actually count on and rely on if shit hits the fan. And this is one of those unique situations in the 1980s when it would be very beneficial to have a good friendship with your neighbor. She starts kind of investigating and having her suspicions about this Aunt Felice as well. And she comes to some pretty startling discoveries when she takes a sample of her blood to a lab and has one of her friends look at it under a microscope. And they start figuring out that this woman is definitely not human. And by the end of the movie, you've got kind of a whole team up going on. And then there's also, which I think is sort of funny in horror movies that never really happens, this one, a late stage sex scene in the final 15 minutes of the film where the father, he is seduced into having sex in the midst of all of this weird shit. He sounds like he's like somewhere in extreme agony and extreme pleasure. At first I thought she was just like torturing him by just having sex with him to death. And then she hears something and she's like, gotta leave. And I was like, oh, thank God she's gonna leave and, give this guy a rest. I mean, he's dying here. And she gets off, from the top of him and he like grabs her and he's like, oh no, get back here. So he's clearly enjoying himself again way too much. And then you have sort of this really rad final confrontation take place where there's a ton of cool special effects. There's like a little body horror going on. This eel-like demonic creature that we get to actually see what's inside of Aunt Felice's character, Joanna Pacula. We get to see like what it is exactly that she's passing on. And then also the soccer mom really gets some really great moments to shine. The soccer mom actually kind of faces off against that fucking rabid cat puppet that appears to be like in extreme heat. This really highly irritable cat puppet. She faces off with that thing and even gets a pretty fucking fantastic one-liner of her own. Only problem is she kind of gets a little bit too cocky after that and tries to throw out another one-liner like she's Arnold Schwarzenegger or something in this final battle, and it backfires. Things actually wrap up here quite nicely with some pretty explosive energy. Explosive, I mean some illogical chain of events that happen with a propane tank from a barbecue grill in the backyard. This film for me hits all the right beats. The only problem with it, I would say, is maybe it's about 10 to 15 minutes, maybe too long. But I mean, as is, it's a ton of fun, but that would be my only critique. I would say that this film is an absolute gem. If you're a fan of 1980s horror, this type of schlocky stuff, heavy on practical effects and stupid characters, 1980s babes, nudity, the whole shebang, everything in here. If you like this sort of stuff as much as I do, and you're an 80s kid and you've never seen The Kiss, highly recommend this one. All right, I will see you next time.